All right, hello. We're here with Chris Sobchack, drum tech, media star, drummer, percussionist extraordinaire. Thank you, Chris, for being here.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure, Rob. Anything I can do, you were part of my musical journey.
Cool. First, I want to start off with where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, primarily, that was where I really got into drums and percussion. But when my parents, they were both college professors, my mom got a job at UC Santa Cruz. So I had the enviable position of spending winters in Utah skiing and hanging out with my dad. Good school system as well. And actually great support for music and drums, oddly. And then during the summers, I was forced to go to sunny Santa Cruz, California, and surf and hang out at the beach and sail. So it was rough, but someone had to do it.
Wow, cool. So when did you first get into music? How old were you?
Interestingly, my parents, some of my earliest memories, my parents would sit around with an acoustic guitar. Neither of them were musicians per se, but they, as a lot of people did in that era, they played folk music. And so they would play Peter, Paul, and Mary stuff, Simon and Garfunkel tunes, and sing a cappella. And then I remember getting into my dad's record collection, which had everything from the Beatles to the Stones to Keith Jarrett and classical, and just sort of poking around. And I was allowed to put records on the record player and just have a little musical exploration.
So who were your musical influences growing up? Was that with those records? Was that your
yeah?
Did you have people? Did you go to concerts or something when you were really young and see live music?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously they exposed me to anything and everything they could, from ballet to opera, which wasn't my favorite. My dad would drag me to stuff like that, and obviously schools would take you at the time. They still had arts programs and whatnot, so you'd go to organized concerts and things. I'm trying to remember what the first rock concert ever I saw, which was so long ago. It was like a Park West concert series that my parents let me go to with somebody's family. I don't even remember who it was. It might have been like Elvis Costello or something. I mean, it was cool. But in an odd way, I was sort of sheltered. My parents worked in the film industry in the academic side. And so I got a lot of music like themes and John Williams and stuff like that, in addition to my parents' music collection, as I said. One of my interesting, shall I say, claims to fame was the fact that every Sunday I would get up and I'd watch football. My parents didn't want to be bothered, so I'd pile up chips and way too many soft drinks in 16-ounce bottles, glass bottles. And I just happened to be flipping channels, and I actually was there to see the actual beginning of MTV. And so I'll never forget that was like, it was a game changer. Suddenly it was like, whoa, okay. And that was sort of part of how I got, I had played viola as a kid with the Suzuki method, and never kind of took off with that. I mean, I was okay, but it was just something I did. And then when I saw MTV, I just remember it was the funniest revelation to me. There were these long-haired goofballs running around in the front. And I thought, wow, those guys are idiots. And I thought, well, wait a minute, that guy in the back, that's kind of cool. I like that. He's kind of grooving back there. I like that. And my dad had gone walking across the University of Utah campus where he worked, was passing through the band room or something, and there was a pair of broken up, half-used, gnarled drumsticks that weren't even matched. And he brought them home and said, hey, I don't know, maybe you want to mess around with these. And my parents never did officially figure out why the couch got lumpy after that. But whenever they weren't around, I literally used to take the sticks and turn the couch into the drum set and play along with records or MTV or anything, having no lessons, no idea what I was doing, just pots and pans and, wooden spoons, as kids do. But obviously I always had some sort of musical sensibility, and music was always in our house. And I think that's something I'm trying to do with my new daughter, is really listen to music every day, all kinds.
Did you get a drum set at that point?
I did a little bit later. One of the things that was really interesting about my musical journey, and I think you and I talked about it when I was your student, was the particular place that I took my first drum lessons was this guy named Steve Gustafson, and I tried to look him up even the other week after we spoke, and can't really find much about him. But he and another partner whose name escapes me, might be Dave Olson, ran this music store in Salt Lake City, Utah, called Drummer's Paradise, or it'll come to me. It's been so long. And one of their things was they realized the utilitarian nature of making learning drums for younger students fun and not boring. And so they were on the cutting edge of a lot of different things. And I said to my dad, hey, I want to get a drum set. I want to learn drums. And so he dragged me around Musicians Pro Shop. That was it. He dragged me to this place that he had found that wasn't far from our house. And we looked at stuff. And of course, it was all super expensive. And my dad was like, I'm not buying that. In the end, I struck a deal with him, and I agreed to pay it back. He paid half, and we found it like in the equivalent of the recycler or the classifieds. Sadly, it was a Black Oyster Pearl Ludwig that was in pretty good shape. That, of course, stupidly, without even realizing it, I got rid of at some point, long before I had any sense of what that might or might not have been. But nonetheless, I got that drum set, and he said, well, you're going to need lessons. And one of the things that they did, which was really great, it was kind of like you're going to take a spoonful of your medicine, but then, we're going to give you a lollipop afterwards. They structured the lessons in such a way that you went through rudiments for a tiny portion of your time, learned physical technique, and then obviously did some book, learning drum tablature. I remember the book, and in fact, I've, as a teacher myself, have referred it to many people as a Carmine Appice's Realistic Rock. Pretty much, if you can get through page 1 to the end of that book, you can play in a bad rock band, no problem. And one of the things that they did, though, is they said, okay, they had the beautiful drum set set up in the teaching room, big PA system and speakers, and they would say, the teacher would talk to you, find out what kind of things you were into, and say, great, I'm going to pick a song that you like in the genre you like. I'm going to know it note for note and play it in front of you, which of course wows the kid. Like, oh my God, he just played that song by Rush or by Boston or whatever. And then we're going to put on a little cassette, and you're going to take it home, and you're going to learn it, practice it, and learn how to listen to drums and try to learn this tune. So at the same time as you'd go into your bedroom or in your little practice room or on your pad and you'd do your paradiddles, you would also get to feel like a rock star and, twirl your sticks and try to learn how Phil Ahart played this or whatever. And for me, it always was like the sugar on top of, as I said, the medicine of the technique you were learning. Plus, of course, it was forcing you to learn and how to listen for drums, which is obviously something that as drummers and even instructors, a lot of times you go like, oh, did you hear that kick drum? And they go, what? No, the kick drum beat. It's pretty cool. And they go, what? What are you talking about? I don't hear that. I just hear the song. The curse of any musician is you're going to hear your own instrument with clarity. And so my dad agreed to pay for 2 lessons a month. And I got right into it, and I was having so much fun and digging the way the lessons were unfolding and what I was experiencing. And I said to him, I want more lessons. And he said, no. At which point I went to the owner of the store and said, look, I'll scrub the toilets, I'll plunge them, I'll vacuum the floor, I'll come in early. All I want is 2 more lessons a month. And that was how I started working at this drum store. Which is how I ended up evolving into a drum tech in an odd way.
Wow. Yeah, those are some pretty incredible, determinations to take lessons. As most kids don't really have that drive. They don't really know why they're doing it. But I think that sense of you really wanting it gave you more of the drive to be a musician and get into the arts, right? Because you really had that passion for it, and your dad kind of put that carrot in front of you and then took it away.
Yeah.
So it really forced you to get into it. Or it didn't force you, but it forced you to really want it, I should say.
Yeah, no, absolutely true. I had to actually engineer it. One of the things that I got out of playing music, which I think is sadly lacking today and why music and arts are so important, was it gave me a sense of self and purpose that I hadn't had before. And I wouldn't consider myself at the time to have been shy, but I wasn't the person that at school would go out for musical theater or enroll in all these clubs. I did my own thing. So when I was learning, of course, you make mistakes. And I had my drum set up in my bedroom, and my parents were very clear, play as much as you want as long as we're not home. So I'd race home from school and I'd practice and practice. They'd get home and I'd be done. I'd play on a pad or do whatever. But and it was years and years later that our next door neighbor said to me, when I saw him long after I had left living in Utah, I'd gone to college, had done other stuff. He said, "Oh, hey, how's it going, Chris?" He said, I never got to tell you, we really liked listening to you play the drums and stuff. And I went, what? I had no idea anybody could hear me. And so I was, at that moment, I was just like, I was flabbergasted. And he said, yeah, it was a little rough at the beginning, but, you got pretty good, really. We actually started enjoying hearing you play. And it was like, wow, my first audience, my first compliment. And like, all right, that was pretty cool. And no, it was just, at that point, it was just a very interesting progression how I ended up where I am now. All very organic, which was cool.
Awesome. So when you were in college, or I should say when you were in high school, maybe junior high school and high school, were you involved in symphonic band, concert band, jazz band? I know you said you didn't do pit orchestra or theater, but did you do marching band or any activities like that?
I wish I had. I did a little bit in college. I did the jazz trios and things through the University of California, Berkeley, not Berkeley, Boston, where I was getting my degree. And the issue that I had, I think, was I came to drumming later. So let's say 10, 11, 12. And by the time I was in that junior high school where I was actually potentially good enough to go out for jazz band or whatever, at the time, and I don't know if there even is such a thing at the moment, but there was such a, dare I say, a caste system. Like if you hadn't been third chair drummer for the big band, you were never, ever, ever going to be first chair for the band unless you were some sort of ridiculous phenom. You would never play. You would sit there and watch. So what few things I went out for, I was sort of out of sync with similar aged compatriots in those classes. And since I hadn't gone through the fire with them, they kind of looked down at me. They looked down at me like, you're not a real drummer. You didn't go to jazz band camp the last 7 years. And so I kind of sheered away from that and actually oddly started playing in original bands much sooner because these were people that thought, wow, you're really good. Yeah, let's jam, man. And then someone said, hey, we're doing a party. You want to play? And I said, sure, I'll do that. And then someone said, hey, we're going to sneak you in the back of the bar because you're only 15, but just don't drink anything and play the set. It's like, okay. So yeah, in an odd way, until I got to college when I sort of faced the same thing, but at least I persevered because I wanted to play some jazz. I wanted to learn more about it and get into it. I had been into the music, but I had never really had the opportunity to be around any cats that could play. And so I really kind of missed out on that. And I wish there would have been an alternative. where I could have come in later and felt welcomed. But at the time, there really wasn't. And that was unfortunate.
So, when you were growing up, did you have mentors, musically or otherwise, that guided you?
Yeah, and it was again the strangest thing. Obviously, I had my teacher, Jason Anderson, who was a phenomenal player, and then once I started working at the store, the two owners and their sort of philosophy of drums and music, really they mentored me in a respect of understanding respect for musical instruments and tuning and that sort of stuff. And then, as I said, by the weirdest confluence of things, very quickly my mentors became, through my musical journey, some of the greatest drummers of all time, just by a fluke. And Rob, you know the story, but for anyone who might hear this, as I said, I was very young and I'm working at this music store. And they had a small auditorium where, as a student, you would learn your song from your lesson and then you'd invite your parents, like a recital, and they'd have cool rock flashing lights and a big PA system, and you'd get up there and play your track and everyone go, ah! It was the greatest thing ever. But they also would use that auditorium for instructional clinics, all instruments, of course. And so they would intelligently, as business owners, when it was time for a clinic, they, of course, would set the auditorium up, and the entrance to the auditorium was inside the music store. And they would open the store and stay open late, and people would line up through the music store and mill about buying everything in sight. So it was all hands on deck for anyone who could work a register. So at one point or another, I'm there, and they said, well, what do we do with the kid? I don't know. It's too young to work the register. Not that I couldn't have, but nonetheless, they said, well, what do we do with him? Well, I don't know. Have him go work with the artist. So the first clinic I ever saw and the first musician I ever saw play drums live, where I was actually focused on drums, was Steve Gadd. And that was followed up shortly by instructor Rick Latham. And that was followed up shortly thereafter by meeting Steve Smith. And obviously he and I became friends over the years and worked with him. And then the game changer for me was Simon Phillips, who I worked with multiple times, and then reconnected with later in my life and went on the road as his technician for about half of the world with Toto. And Dave Weckl, obviously, was another huge influence on me in that respect. And I eventually worked on Dave's records and became friends with him and toured the world with the Chicory Electric Band in a variety of capacities. And it was those guys, in an odd way, that as I got older became my mentors, and yourself included, where, you'd hear stories of Steve Smith or Weckl having these lessons with Freddie Gruber. And then they'd come back and you'd be chatting with them about it, and they'd be saying, oh, he told like 8 hours of stories, but here's this cool thing he showed me. And then you'd try to do it, and they'd say, no, not like that, like this. And so suddenly you realize you're, getting drum lessons, if you will, and life lessons and mentoring by some of the most influential players ever. And I was lucky enough to have that trend continue even to this day, with the musical side of things. And I look back at some of the people that have influenced my playing and me as a person. And it's quite humbling, to be truthful.
Well, that's an incredible story. So you kind of fell into it by accident.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you were growing up, did you have a practice routine? You kind of talked about the school and you had a lesson plan, and you do your reading rudiments and then working on a tune and then performing it. Did you have a routine that you did every day? Like the way I grew up is the more hours we did, the kind of more cool you were. So if you did like 8 hours a day, you were cool, even though it meant nothing.
Right, of course.
It's like playing for 8 hours, and then a lot of times we wasted time. But another thing that kind of happened to us, and this is throughout my whole life, has always been the competition. And that forced us to practice more because you wanted to be better than the other guy. And you mentioned the jazz band thing. That was cutthroat when I was in both elementary school and high school. We're always out to get each other. And who would show up first? It was at 6 a.m, and whoever would show up first would get on the kit first. And we had no problem of getting to school before the band room was even open. So, what was your practice routine? Did you have a certain amount of did you practice every day? Did you practice for a few hours? Did you have a structured practice? Were you just jamming? What was your practice routine then, and do you still practice now?
So I chose specifically, like I even said a little earlier, I liked to take my medicine first. So I would race home from school when my parents weren't in the house, and I realized I had an absolute finite amount of time, depending on when that car would pull in the driveway, and then I was done. So I would take care of my rudiments first, whatever had been assigned, and then I would move on always to my book stuff, whether it was simple stuff in the early days, like, as I said, the realistic rock, learning basic drum tabulature and rock beats, and then putting together an 16 bar exercises, and or whether it was, later some of obviously the classic quintessential books, with nonlinear, linear beats and cool stuff that you could spend days and days moving a 16th note one thing, and it's a whole new beat. You're like, oh, that's cool. And then I'd always obviously want to be ready for my teacher with my song. So I'd break the songs down into, and in an odd way, I built over the years, which some people do, some don't, my own drum shorthand tabulature for charting a tune. Somewhat legitimate musical notation, but a lot of it isn't, because once I have the beat structure, I just need to know bars, and I need to know, buttons and things like that. So I'd write the tune out in the most graphic, basic sense, chop it up and put that stuff together. And then last but not least, in a secondary sense, if I had any time left, I would love to just flip the radio on to whatever rock radio station I was listening to and just see if I could groove along and not crash the bus. And do that right until my parents walked through the door. The other thing that I think was really important for me, as not necessarily part of a practice routine per se, but distinctively in the sensibility of learning drums and coming to like an abstract conclusion, was, well, since I couldn't play when my parents were there on the actual kit, I would always be working beats out on my legs. I would have a strap-on practice pad. I would always have sticks in my hands doing something, even if they weren't hitting a cymbal or a thing. And then I learned very quickly that if I could sing it, I could play it. So I would start trying to figure out, as embarrassing as it was, to be able to, how do I sing that beat? What sound do I make in my mouth to get my head a ride cymbal or a snare or a kick drum? And there was 1,000 times in the car where my dad or my mom would have to say, you do know that's really, really annoying. And I'd be like, what? And they're like, you're drumming on the car. And I'd be like, oh, I am? So in some ways, I just constantly was doing it. As I moved, at one point, I was touring the world with Toto or Elton as a technician, and simultaneously I was playing in multiple bands. I think at one point in a 30-day or 60-day period, I was playing in 8 separate bands in the Los Angeles area. Plus, I was working in the studios, tuning on records and ghosting and teching. And I think I clocked, because I used to have like a little paper calendar book. I think I clocked something in a 60-day period. I did 78 different rehearsals or gigs or sessions. It was like constant, all different styles of music, intentionally. And obviously, at that moment, there was nothing you couldn't do. So as I've moved forward, the thing that's been interesting is all the tech gigs I've ever done, I've always still had to play, whether it be sound checks, occasionally having to sit in with the band for rehearsals or camera blocking or even shows, which is a whole nother can of worms. And oddly, as much as I know I've probably lost a little bit of endurance because I don't get to sit down and practice for 6 or 8 hours, my mind has never stopped drumming. My hands and my brain and my connection to the independence I developed over all those years of playing hasn't left. So very rarely do I hear anything or sit down and try to play something that doesn't come out. It's the oddest thing. So I don't practice or play very much anymore, but in an odd way, every single day, all day long, somehow I'm playing beats. And it's kind of kept my brain and my body sharp to do it.
So
I don't know if that makes any sense.
It's still in your life. Mm-hmm. Do you have a drum set at your current residence?
I don't have an acoustic set, but I have a conglomerate of leftover electronic pads and, as it turns out, a Yamaha Brain that I've set up downstairs. And actually, my daughter loves when I play it. She literally sits there and watches, and she has her own little keyboard drum thing, and she's got great rhythm and little maracas and stuff. It's hilarious. Not bad for 9 months. Yes, so I get to sit down occasionally when I have a bug up my butt and actually play. And most of the time, I'm usually on the road somewhere, and I'm usually fingers and hands on drums, working drum stuff. This will be the longest break I've had by far in well over 20 years. I've been touring pretty much nonstop and working in the studios or with bands or multiple bands or playing or going on tour. And it's been a ridiculous journey, to be truthful.
Yeah, it's like kind of like that for all of us, where everything changed with what we did before. But, going through a change of what we're doing now and moving forward instead of looking back. So talk about going to college. So did you move to San Francisco Bay Area to go to college? You mentioned UC Berkeley. Mm-hmm. So did you move from Salt Lake City to, I guess, the East Bay, or did you go to San Francisco or the Bay Area?
I had been moving back and forth, obviously, yearly, between obviously half yearly to Salt Lake to Santa Cruz. So when I graduated high school, loaded everything up, busted out of there, came zipping on down to the Bay Area, went down to Santa Cruz, and then went up and found an apartment just on the border of Berkeley, Emeryville there, and the edge of Oakland. Pretty scary area, actually. And then eventually I got an apartment not far off campus, and pretty much lived there the time I was in college. And then I would take semesters off because at the same time I was involved with the Chicoria Electric Band with Dave Wackel and Patitucci and Eric Marienthal and Frank Gambale and Chick. It was the band. It was pretty awesome. And I would go down to LA and do stuff there and do a tour with them or whatever. And then I would also work in studios to earn money to go back up to Berkeley to do the next semester. So it was kind of then I was doing the San Francisco, LA thing. but I was always in the on that side of things. Yeah.
What were you studying at Berkeley? What was your major?
I got my degree in political science, of all things. I studied the breakup of the Soviet Union, Perestroika, and Glasnost, all of which, in an odd way, it was mostly to appease my parents to get a college degree, and from the best undergrad school I could get into and pay for. I had gotten into Stanford, but it was just too expensive, and so Berkeley made sense. And obviously, the music scene at the time in Berkeley and in the whole Bay Area was great. There were, so many great clubs and places to play live music and go see live music. Great jazz at Laval's, Larry Blake's, sorry, right on Telegraph Avenue, and had been there for eons. And obviously got to meet a lot of guys playing a lot of pickup bands and party bands and all kinds of fun stuff like that.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff happening. There was I think the Yoshis, and then there was a Kimball's.
Yep,
which
Kimball's
started
East,
in San Francisco, and then it came over to the East Bay and Emeryville.
Yep,
and everybody was coming through there, and like everything was always happening, and everybody was always at all these shows, and we'd hang out with everybody. Yep. I remember hanging out with Vinny, and I went to school with Jeff Watts. He was there playing with Branford Marcellus, and who else? I remember Herbie Hancock with Al Foster, and then another Berkeley friend was playing with him, Gene Jackson, and I remember seeing that. It was like one of the openings or something, and all these things were happening. It was like, and the clinics were great too. So we had Drum World, the old Drum World in San Francisco. And he would do clinics. Don would do clinics, I think, like every month. So, and then he doubled the artists up. So it would be like Simon Phillips with Louis Bellson, or Terry Rossio with Louis Bellson, and then they come out in the end and play. Those were actually really, those were really great. It was about $20. I remember Dave Weckl did a few. I know Steve Smith did a few. Dennis Chambers. Just had everybody, and we got so much out of that. And it was packed, right?
Oh yeah, always.
I always tell the story about Dave Weckl. He was like the Michael Jackson in the '80s of drummers.
Oh yeah,
pretty much everybody was there to see him play, and he always had the ability to play with tracks with no headphones. No, they didn't have in-ear monitors then.
Nope.
Perfectly on. And the only time he actually made a mistake, he apologized. Oh, I'm sick. I'm this. He never made mistakes ever. And he was dead on and play all that the contemporary drummer stuff and just amazing, and the soloing and everything. His time was just impeccable. But yeah, I remember that all that stuff was happening, and it was so educational at the time. Obviously, that's all changed. So we don't have that anymore. I don't know different parts of the country, but certainly not in the Bay Area anymore. With everything that's happened financially. So anyway, yeah, you make a good point about the area and the amount of music and how rich it was.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful.
So, when you started doing the electric band, did you start to get into sound engineering? Because I remember seeing you.
Yes,
I remember this distinctly, and there's a few things I remember with you. But I remember the time, and it was at the Kimball's East.
Yep.
And you were doing the monitor mix.
Oh yeah.
And Bobby McFerrin had gotten up to sit in with Chick, because Bobby McFerrin lived locally, and he used to play with my drum teacher, or my drum teacher used to play with him. But I remember that you were doing the mix, and Chick was getting mad, and he was
Oh yeah.
He would get, and this is the one thing about Chick that I always remember. If somebody didn't do sound right, he would have a fit.
That was an interesting, the whole dynamic of me ending up being the monitor engineer was, to say the least, interesting. So the guy that was the front of house sound engineer, named Larry McCall, great guy. The only tech thing he could do was to set the drums up. So even though I was a drum tech and I could tune the drums for Dave and I could actually tech for Dave, Larry would come in the old school traditional roadie capacity and set the drums up. Alibi, pretty close. So they were like, well, you got to provide utility. So Chick had his own technician. So I actually set up the bass rig for Patitucci, Eric's saxophone amplification system, Gambale's amps, although he'd come in and do all of his guitars. That was nothing I ever had to deal with. And then Dave said, well, if you want to come on the road, we need you to be the monitor engineer. And I went, I don't know anything about that. And he literally handed me a third band graphic EQ, 2-channel, graphic EQ, said, plug this into your stereo, put on your favorite music, play with it, and figure out what it does. You'll be fine. There's no vocals. But with that being said, it was extremely challenging because we had what's called regional sound. We didn't carry any sound equipment with us. So on one day, it could be trying to do the electric band, and they liked some odd things like the stereo monitors when you stood in the front to solo, which meant that you could hear your effects sweeping as you were standing there, which totally makes no difference except for ooh la la factor for the musician. And so I could see anything from like a 24-channel PV desk and some really bad broken in, monitors like we've all seen when we've played bad rock clubs, or I could get this incredible, beautiful, system like, a Midas Ghost. And I had to learn how to run all of them, EQ everything from scratch every day, and then try to make the greatest, most audiophilic musicians in the world happy every day. And it was brutal, to say the least. And even on the best of days, it was tough. But then when you'd have a last-minute guest star come on, and you didn't even have enough channels for them, then it got a little kooky at times. So, I remember that day.
Yeah, you remember that?
I used to have a T-shirt that said, "Friends don't let friends mix monitors."
Yeah. Well, I remember certain things vividly, and I remember that, and I remember the snare drum. There was a snare drum that came out that was the Dave Weckl dual
throw
off switch, which you talked me into it. I bought it. Definitely was like a great drum to have. But I remember you got up there and you go, oh, and you demoed it for me, and we went up on stage, and for me it was a delight, got to know Dave like a little bit, not that well, but I just remember his sense of memory. Oh. He would remember your name.
Yeah.
And that was the weirdest thing. Like like people would forget names, but he would always, like, you could maybe be like a day or a week or a month. He would remember your name and remember you.
Simon is the same.
Yeah,
absolutely the same.
That sense of memory, and you go, oh, that's why he can do all that stuff. He's got a great memory.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I mean that whole era of my musical development was obviously, every night to watch the greatest musicians in the world play some of the greatest, most technical, difficult songs, to see what they kept the same, to see what they did different, how they changed, but then paid homage to the musical form of the tune, was something outstanding. I mean, one of the things that's tough for me to fathom, and people say, oh, you should write a book about all this stuff. And then I think, great, maybe when I'm 90. But some of the experiences that I've had over the years in the studio, one of the things I didn't like about some of the clinics, and like I would be at the clinic with Weckl setting the gear up, and then during the in and out or the autograph session or whatever, I had to be bad cop because, of course, nobody wants to say, look, guys, I got to go. And, you get some pimple-faced kid at the front goes, so, dude, are you better or is Vinny better? And you'd sort of kind of try to diffuse those situations with, like, there's room for everybody. Vinny is ridiculous, but he's not Weckl. Weckl's not Vinny. They're two incredible musicians that are totally different. Steve Smith, Simon, Nigel Olsson, one of the simplest, grooviest drummers you'll ever hear in your life. And no one can sound like he does. You can try, but you can't. It's just it's a personal feeling of a musical expression and a lope that defines it. And one of the things, as I said, with me, being able to be there and have unlimited access to some of these guys to ask them questions or to be at the right time at the right place. I always tell the story that I got lucky enough, I didn't work with him. He was serviced by a rival company, Jeff Porcaro, in the studios in Los Angeles. And I believe it was at a studio called Westlake, where they recorded Michael Jackson's stuff, the old original Westlake on Beverly. And he would pull up the van with the gear in the back in this cruddy alley. And you'd knock on the door, and if they were done, you'd start loading your gear in. Somebody else might be loading out. And I remember going in, and Jeff's kit was set up, and he was waiting. And it was some random session during that period of time. A lot of the Japanese artists would come over and pay cash money to have people like Gad, Weckl, Steve Lukather, all these, as we used to like to call them, the Yo-Cats, play on their tracks. And then they'd take it back to Japan and mix it. But they'd come over and just pay huge amounts of money to have the guys. And Jeff had just finished tracking, and I was bringing Luis Conti, stunning percussionist's gear in for overdubs. And Jeff was sitting there waiting, having a smoke as he did, and waiting to make sure they didn't need anything more from him. So I had to wait. So I was just chatting with Jeff. I, of course, had met him and then run into him. And somehow it got on the topic of the shuffle. And I will never forget him, in a very simple sense, explaining to me that you can't really write it. Because you can't, if you write it in 4, it's one thing. If you write it in 3, it's something else. And neither one really, dotted 8s, dotted 16. It never really respects the intent of the shuffle, the flow. And then he took his stick and he showed me something which was similar to one of the things that Weckl had taught me over the years, of the idea that you're feeling the pulse of the quarter note, not of the shuffle. It's almost like incidental contact. And if you train your wrist to kind of have this thing, it's less of a single note and more of a, you felt it. And it like unlocked a door for me to be like, oh, I get it. I've been spending all this time trying to read how you played Rosanna. You can't read it. You got to understand it and then feel it and play it. And he literally sat there and he played. I mean, how many people get the opportunity to say, hey, Jeff, how'd you do that? I've had so many of those, and with so many of the great artists. Steve Smith, as you know, I did some work with him in the Bay Area when he was cleaning up his lockers and houses and things. And he used to have the 2 drum sets in what used to be the dance room facing the glass, the mirror. And I had said something about A 7/8 double bass drum shuffle. And like, wow, that's really cool. You're a great double bass drum player. I can't do that. And I remember Steve said to me, yeah, you can. I said, no, I can't do that. He said, sure you can. He said, sit down. And he was so open at sharing his knowledge. And I'll never forget, he said, do you lead with your left or your right? And I said, this. And he said, okay. He said, can you do this with your feet? Ga-dum, 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 ga-dum. And I was like, yeah, I can do that. I said, okay, so do it. So I'm sitting there with Steve Smith to my right, I'm to his left, and I'm going, this is pretty cool. And he says, well, can you play Jazz Ride Simple Time? I'm like, yeah, sure. He says, well, but you want to play it straight, not swung. So ding, ding, da, ding, ding, da, ding, ding, da, ding. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I'm doing it. I'm doing it with him. That's cool. He says, okay, we'll put a backbeat in. Okay, he says, now you're going to add a grace note. He says, now you're playing Billy Cobham's Quadrant 4. He says, okay, now take out one of the backbeats. He says, great, now you're playing Space Boogie. I looked down, and of course the beat crashed. But I was doing it, and he broke it down as any good teacher like yourself does. There's a way that you make the person's brain understand, oh, so that's what Garibaldi's doing. That's what Vinny did there. And there are those moments of limitation where you look at how somebody did something and go, I can't physically make my fingers go that fast, or my technical capability. But as a musical journey, to understand how to break stuff down, and then to have someone like Steve Smith take the time to show you how to do that, or Jeff Porcaro give you the philosophy of a shuffle. I think the only other one, I mean, there's hundreds I could tell you, but I used to set up in Los Angeles in the studios for Steve Gadd, and it was obviously a huge privilege. I was one of the only people that he would allow to tweak and tune the kit, because he knew it always would sound right. And he would just come into the session. I would get sounds with the engineer. I did that for lots of the clients that I worked with at one of the drum cartage houses. And I became very good at chameleoning how I hit the drums stylistically to approximate so the engineer would get the correct levels. You'd do it for Harvey Mason, and then you do it for Ken Aronoff, and everywhere in between. Otherwise, there would be no point in doing it. And I remember there was a session, it was at the Complex in West Los Angeles, and I'd set up Gadd's kit that we stored, so with his heads the way he liked them, stretched in really hard and floppy. And he had been in town doing some sessions, so we had his cymbal bag, the cymbals that he was traveling with, including his very famous hats, his hi-hats. So I set it all up, his sticks, and having been around Steve, you learn that Steve comes from a marching background, that he doesn't do literally any press roll stuff. And everything is open stroked, actually stroked, no matter how pianissimo and tight it sounds. He's actually playing that. He's not buzzing it. He's not rubbing it. And which is frightening, but it also starts informing you about his sound. And then you used to sit at his snare drum the way he liked it, and you'd realize, oh, you couldn't buzz on this thing anyway. The wires are intentionally set in such a way that it chokes the sound of that snare hit. That's how you get the Steve Gadd sound, where it's that tight little put, no matter whether it's a grace note or a backbeat. And so I'm sitting there, I'm all set up, and obviously having done this, not thinking much about it. And the engineer gets on, he goes, yeah, it's we're doing this thing, and we kind of want that, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover kind of Steve Gadd linear kind of thing. Can you just play me something kind of along those lines, whatever you can do, just so I can kind of, I've got, the mics are all working, but I just kind of want to put a little thing together. I was like, oh, I know how to play that. I start playing on Gadd's with traditional grip. I start playing 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. And of course, I look up and Steve's in the control room, bopping his head, and I'm going, oh, for fuck's sake. Playing 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover in front of Steve Gadd, on Steve Gadd's equipment, with Steve Gadd's sticks and Steve Gadd's cymbals. And he came out and we had a little giggle and he said, yeah, I said, that's it. You got it. But at the same time, one of the things you realize is, and if you watch Steve Gadd 20 times, 50 times, 100 times, or Weckl, or Steve Smith, or any of the great percussionists, there's a reason they do certain things. Like that beat isn't anything special. Gadd just decided to take his left hand from playing grace notes on the snare drum and put it over here. If you put it here, it's almost a marching beat, which of course is his background. You start getting a sensibility about body language of a drummer. You start having these little insights when you sit behind enough drummers enough times to figure out their scene and what makes them tick. And it's been one of the most amazing things to have been gifted by the gods of percussion, shall we say, that I would have the opportunity to see all these amazing musicians and have these moments that you couldn't pay for. And it's been very, as I said, very humbling.
That's incredible. So you got to hang out with everybody in a sense, and that private time. Yeah,
the list is terrifying when I actually think about it. I mean, it's, some of those have passed. Louis Bellson, Tony Williams a little bit. Some of the other guys like Bernard Purdy. As far as percussionists, lots of time with Luis Conti over the years. Paulinho, Costa. Drummers, it's just absurd. It's like, Harvey Mason, John Robinson, Weckl, Gadd, Simon Phillips, Nigel Olsson, Kurt Busquera, Denny Fongheiser. It's just, there's rarely anyone you can bring up that I haven't had some dealings with, good, bad, or otherwise. And quite a few of them I've been lucky enough to call them my friends and go hang out at their pool and have a margarita or be on tour with them. And obviously one of the coolest things is to get to know the person, and it helps inform how they play, what they're all about. I think probably my favorite drummer ever is Gadd because of how emotional he is on the kit. It's something special when he lays into a kick drum and he's literally almost falling into the equipment. I think it's just the most awesome thing ever. But then when you actually speak to him and you kind of get a sensibility of his body motion, it's instantaneously obvious that that's just who he is. It's not, he didn't wake up one day and open a book and say, I think today I'm going to learn how to get into that kick drum. That's just how he felt it. And that's, I suppose, probably my biggest lesson in the music world was getting to a point where the facility of my body, the independence that we all strive for, the fifth limb, the brain, or you can put all four limbs on autopilot, and the fifth limb is either composing, listening, reacting to your bandmates. It's something special when you get to that level where it's almost like you float out of the seat. It's not about the chart or what meter is this in, am I on time? And there's no more technical questions, and it becomes an emotionally engaged experience with your fellow musicians to create something artistic and to actually have some sort of deep connection on a musical level through your instrument as an extension of your body and your brain. And for me, that's the coolest moment of music. And when I don't get to play enough, that's what I miss. And I can even just get that by playing along to the radio. I get it, that great moment when I know this is going to be a massive double crash coming right here because this is what it calls for. And you're like, yeah, that was good. I liked that. But yeah, and to see all these great musicians do it night after night, obviously, and learn. And like I said, to see how they interpret it differently every night without betraying the song is just really special. And as I said, I've now been playing and teching well over 35 years. And never in a million years would I ever have thought that this is how it would have happened. Just amazing stuff.
So you started at 15 or something teching?
I literally probably started teching when I was 15 or so. I started playing. It might have even been more like 14.
Wow.
At the music store almost immediately. And one of the other things at the music store, which was huge, and I cannot challenge everyone that you teach and pass this on to, learn how to tune, learn the instrument, learn how every knob and thing works, makes you a better drummer. The guy that I mentioned earlier, Steve Gustafson, he had a rule. He wanted repeat clientele. And back in the day, there was no internet to go research how to set a drum set up. There were no instructions included with entry-level drum sets. They just gave you the box and off you went. And set it up for little Jimmy under the Christmas tree. Sounded like crap, looked like crap, fell over like crap, and was out the door pretty quickly like crap because it's no fun. So Steve had this thing where he would not sell a drum set to a parent or anyone else unless it was built by us. You want me to put it in 5 separate boxes after that? No problem. But I won't just sell you the box, because they used to come from Japan and elsewhere nested in plastic. So they have all the hoops off, all the parts in little bags, everything nested and wrapped in bubble foam and things like that. So probably during the time I worked at the music store, I must have built from scratch between Tama Rockstars and Pearl export drum sets, 300 to 500 of them from scratch, and had to stretch the heads in, learn how to tune them, actually make them sound good, fix any problems. It was like a drum tech school without knowing it. How to set up snare wires so you're not choking the drum, how to do this, how to tension that. What are you shooting for here? And I've been lucky enough to actually help occasionally sit in. It's been a long time, but a guy named Mark Coy in Los Angeles and North Hollywood worked for Frank Zappa, and he ran Joe's Garage, the studio. And after Frank's passing, they kept the studio open as a studio, but also they worked with, and I hope they're still doing this, Los Angeles Unified School District to actually be part of a larger entertainment arts vocational class thing for high school students. And every so often when his regular teachers weren't available, he would have me come in and actually teach the drum tech class, which is just a day-long sample. But 2 or 3 of the people that I taught over the years got so excited by it, we stayed in contact and have actually gone on to become drum techs and are out touring the world and occasionally send me a little note saying, thank you, you gave me my career. But learning how to teach tuning in a way that most people can understand it. And so I always advise people that I work with, even some of the top pros, every so often when you got some downtime like now, take your drum set completely apart, put it back together, and make sure that everything is put in a place that actually makes sense, that's ergonomic. My favorite thing that I do, and I'm in no way a teacher of your caliber, but I don't mind giving some young kids good starting lessons, how to hold a drumstick so you don't get carpal tunnel. And one of the things I love to do when I talk about setting up a drum set, even with professionals, is say, look, if I gave you a hammer and I said, I want you to hammer a nail in up there, you're not going to get on your tippy toes and go like this. You're going to get a ladder. You're going to go up there and you're going to whack it. Well, we've all seen the guy that's got that really cool looking drum set with his drums all flat as a pancake and the cymbals way out there. And every time he wants to hit anything, he's leaning over and reaching. Hey, it might look cool, and if it works for you, that's good, but it's not the most efficient. And suddenly, when you start thinking about your setup from an ergonomic standpoint, and I got a lot of this from Weckel as well, when he started switching to traditional grip and realizing for years he had had the snare drum working against him. And then if he changed the angle more like you saw in the classic big bands, that, hey, all of a sudden the stick comes back where I need it so I can do the next stroke more efficiently. And obviously that was distilled from Freddie Gruber, from Buddy Rich, and, Gene Krupa. So it was one of these interesting things where I really like trying to pass on the knowledge that I've gained from these weird moments with Jeff and whoever else and Weckel. And you realize that it all does come down to actually taking pride in your instrument. It used to pain me greatly when I'd see the Green Day drummer knock his drum set over and destroy one drum set a night. They would send him out and he would play the tour on the cheapest drum set they made, like it was a Pearl Export or something, so that they literally could just have a new box for every show in the truck. And at the end of the show, they would just destroy the drum set. Always, anyone come near my drum set that I'm teching, I'm like, you back away, you're going to take a mic stand to the head. It's like, no. This is a priceless, beautiful, thoroughbred racehorse over here. You back off now. But and that's sort of how I approach the instrument. I mean, it's been such a window into something special for me for my whole life. Paid for my house.
Yeah, you make a good point about the setting up and the tuning, because when I have a story. In fact, I have an older brother, and his friend played drums, who got me into studying with my teacher from high school, Scott Morris, who was, I don't know if you know him, but who had passed. But I had a drum set. It was a Japanese drum set. It's actually on my website. We thought it was a Ludwig Black Oyster Pearl. It was a Japanese, back then Japanese drum sets were very cheap. Now they're great, right? And I said, well, I got this drum set, I'm 10 years old. What do I do with it? How do I tune it? And he goes, well, tune it the way you like it. And I go, well, but I don't know what I like. I was into like Ringo Starr and like I think Iron Butterfly and like Chicago and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, things that were kind of happening at the time. And like he kind of started tuning it for me, but there was never really anything about setting up. I think I had my second drum teacher in life kind of taught me a little bit about setting up and whatnot. And then later on, tuning was like a mystery. Nobody knew about snare drums. Nobody knew about taking the actual the snares off and restringing it or the strap. Nobody knew about that. My father was into fixing things, so my father, we would take stuff apart. He would actually drill holes in drums for me when I was like trying to replace spurs or trying to upgrade my kits. But yeah, that was something that I don't think anybody really did, or nobody really had a way of tuning and fixing things. So what would happen is their drums would be horrible, and just sound horrible and set up horribly, and putting duct tape on the heads, and just making them down. Oh, there's a snare buzz. We can't have that. Everything's got to be duct tape. So, for me, what happened is I started really getting into, learning how to tune. Actually, I'll be honest with you. Weckel had a good point in he did like VHS tapes.
Oh, I remember
one. I think it was called Back to Basics with tuning, and actually that was a really good video. And I started to take my stuff apart and start to tune it. And then what I did from there is I really got very anal retentive about it. Like, I hate the way this sounds, and I do it over and over again, spend hours and hours and hours. So the more I did it, the more I got into it, the more that I was, very nitpicky about it. So What I started doing with my students is offering, I will come to your house. I will set up your drum set. I will tell you how to, I will set it up in a ergonomic way. I will tell you how to tune. I will show you, and we'll work together. I will clean your drums. I'll do all this as a service. Now you have to pay me. I'm going to charge you for me driving out to your house and all this, but this is going to be invaluable for you. This is going to set you up. Now, some of them don't go for it, right? But some of them did, and they learned a lot from it. And I feel that is a very big part of the instrument, which I still think to this day nobody really talks about. We just see, as far as what's going on now, you see all these like cool drum videos or whatnot, and you don't really hear a lot of people talking about, like, the actual setting up and the actual tuning. I'm seeing a couple things now that are starting to come out, but not as much as people really trying to figure out like all these different ways of tuning and tuning for different kinds of music and different heads and all these very intricate parts of the kit. So I think that, like, your training and what you went through is really an intricate thing for a lot of people to learn, besides even playing. And the way your drums sound will make you, it inspires you. It inspires you to play better. And I think that when you're
play more.
Yeah, play more, play better. But I think when your stuff sounds bad, it just, you don't know. And that's a lot of things that happen, is they don't know it sounds bad. They don't know what they like. It just kind of, when I was 10 years old, you don't know anything. And then when that moment happens, when it actually sounds good, and you go, oh wow, this is fun, and it inspires you. It's like a game changer. It's a life elevating moment. So, that's really a good point about that. What you're talking about with helping people out and educating them about that with their instrument. I want to go on to another question about doing all these different things in your life. What do you think the most challenging project you'd ever done was? What was that time where you just, it was like you almost, it was life changing. You almost didn't get through it.
Oh, well, okay, there's probably, as far as in the music side of things, I can tell you two. Definitely being thrown into the deep end with the Chicory Electric Band, and being put in the position of being the monitor engineer. And actually, I, to this day, don't know if it still holds, but at the time, I was the only monitor engineer the Electric Band didn't fire, ever. I finished the tour, entire world tour, and ended up going back to college, and they were doing other things, and it didn't work out for me to be on tour with them anymore. That was a sink or swim moment that was really, really brutal. And also, the learning curve was incredible. And then as a musician, I've had the opportunity and luck to sit in and play drums on stage with Elton John, sitting in for Nigel Olsson. Most recently, I've had to go up on stage and sit in for the percussionist, John Mahon, on tour on stage for a few shows, and certain songs that had to have a percussive element while he was in hospital in Australia. And those things never were a problem. Obviously, you're only as good as your most recent screw up. So basically, you wanted to get up there, make Elton and the band happy, put on a good performance for the audience, and not train wreck the band, considering you're the guest musician, if you will. Those ones actually weren't hard for me. What was hard for me, that I remember, I was playing in a band, and Simon Phillips actually agreed to produce a track or two for us. And so I had my kit set up in his studio in the Valley in Los Angeles here at the time. And I remember playing what I thought was to the nth of my ability on this track. And Simon coming in from the control room and saying to me, it's like, that was great take, Chris. That was fantastic. But in the second verse, there was a few snare drum hits that just weren't as even as the other ones. So why don't we run it again and just let's really focus and let's just really get everything really tight. And I remember doing that take after take after take, and I could feel my energy and my focus waning. And I remember at one point, I can't remember if he came in the room and said, that was almost it, but just there's these three things. And I remember he left the room and I actually set the sticks down and I actually started to like weep. And what I was realizing was I'm me as a drummer. And here's Simon Phillips with his level of technical capability, knowing what is physically possible, like someone like Steve Smith or Weckl, looking at you saying, it's good, but it's not here where I want it. And I was realizing that at least at that moment in time, I couldn't play it any better. And it was a horribly brutal revelation of, I just gave you my best take, and into your ears, it's not good enough. And the song turned out great, and the tracks were brilliant, and some of the best I ever played. But it was almost an emotional breakdown to get there. And meanwhile, other moments and sessions where you've had the exact opposite. You did one take, and everyone went, "Wow, guess we got the drum track." But that was probably, quite honestly, as far as the music, those two things in the music industry. And then I branched out and I'm in the film industry now as a producer. And I've had only one other experience in the film industry where it was a Friday and we were shooting our first episode of a show on Saturday morning. And I had to fill out a certain amount of paperwork by a certain deadline on the Friday, get in my truck, drive over the hill, which is lots of traffic, 35, 40 minutes, to go pick up the lighting and the electrical equipment. Gripen Electric is the nomenclature. And I remember being on the phone with them as I was careening over mountain roads going, please don't close. I'll be there 5 minutes after you're closing. Please wait for me. And getting there totally calm and relaxed as my tech persona is when all hell is breaking loose. You have to be the one that's in control and calm and work the problem. I remember getting all the equipment in the truck. Literally, I pulled out, they had padlocked the gate for the weekend. I drove towards my next appointment, pulled the car over to the side of the road and just lost it because it's the closest to everything falling apart and not making the show happen, as it were, that I've ever come. But no, being a tech teaches you that when everyone else is losing their head, you take a breath and you work one step at a time to fix the problem. Because it is, people look at techs, music techs, film techs, but especially live music. The last thing you want is to have the entire Chicory Electric Band or Toto staring at you when something's wrong. And the audience is waiting to hear Hold the Line to end the night. That is not the time you want to have a problem. So you work very hard to make sure that doesn't happen. But when those moments happen and they're staring at your back and the sweat's rolling down your neck, that's when you have to be at your best and you're most calm and you're most focused and never let it bother you. It's pretty crazy, to be truthful.
Well, that's an incredible story. I want to ask you about your media company, and that's probably another challenge we had talked about on the phone. That you did a series for Netflix, you said,
Amazon
Life,
yeah.
and you talked about doing that nonstop, like trying to get video out and all the actors taking their film and editing everything together. So maybe you could talk about doing that as another project and how that came to be.
Yeah, my wife is a lifelong actress. She ran a theater company in New York, off Broadway, and then obviously made the decision to move to Los Angeles for film and television world. We got together, and as I said earlier, both my parents were involved in the film industry on the academic side. So I ended up sort of going the music direction, and then as the famous line is, just when you think you're out, they suck you back in. And when my wife and I got together, it became obvious, and one of our dear friends was the film producer, Gary Marshall, who did Pretty Woman and Happy Days and all that. And he was lovely, and he said, you guys don't wait for anybody to put you in their movie. Make your own content, start doing it. And then you're going to get recognized. So we started our company, Raptastic Productions, and we did stuff for my wife's acting reel, which helped her get her SAG card and start getting real roles. And so that was like, oh, wow, we did something cool there. And then we started looking for projects and things, and my wife came up with this very funny sort of sketch comedy short form series called Please Tell Me I'm Adopted. And the basis of it was she was in the Second City improv troupe in her conservatory class. These two young women were disparaging a lady who had walked past them the other direction on Hollywood Boulevard. And they basically were saying, oh my gosh, she's wearing a burqa. She and her ideology have set us free women back all this time. And my wife said, wait a minute, what if there could be some comedic interest here? What if I didn't want to drive? What if I didn't want to vote? What if I didn't want to have any of those responsibilities that have been so hard fought for? So she wrote it up as a sketch. Didn't end up getting used in her Second City Conservatory show. And so she decided, let's just throw a script together. Let's just film it ourselves. We'll just put it up on YouTube, ostensibly to exercise her demons, if you will, of the sketch that wasn't. And in the end, what happened was, which was really interesting, she woke up next to me in bed and she sat bolt upright and said, after a writing session, oh my God, this isn't one sketch. This is the basis for a series. And of course, in true producer fashion, I sat up next to her and rubbed my eyes and said, oh God, what's this going to cost me? And so we put this together. And again, initially we were just going to put it up on YouTube or whatever. And then we wrote a pilot in 6 episodes. And then everyone started seeing what we were doing, and some of our friends got involved, and we had Panavision, cinema lenses that Kubrick used, and one of them. We had all this great gear and all the real crews, and I really put together the production, which was not dissimilar from being a stage manager on a tour or a tour manager. So a lot of it was cross for me with the things I was already doing on tour with Toto or the Electric Band or any of the other tours I've done. And started doing that. And then we got into the post-production side, and everyone had said, wow, this is too good to just put up on YouTube. You should sell it. You should put it on Amazon, do something. So we decided to go with Amazon, and we got into the post-production side of things, and I realized, crap, we have no money left. We had done it on a shoestring budget with a little bit of crowdfunding, and that to get the episodes to a level where we felt like we could put our name on them, that I would physically have to do the post myself, because there's just no way we could afford what we needed to have done. So I taught myself all of it. And obviously my music world stuff has come in handy in the sense that obviously spending all that time in the studios with some of the greatest recording engineers in the world, listening to them put mixes together and understanding sensibilities of, even with your own band, you do the drive test, you go out and you put it in the car stereo, and then you listen to it really loud, and then you listen to it really quiet, and you make sure your things are popping through in the right spot. And suddenly I'm doing that, but I'm doing it with dialogue, or I'm mixing in the music bed or the ambient track and things that, quite honestly, a lot of filmmakers don't have any concept about. So I was able to bring my music knowledge to the post-production world. And we did the whole first season, as I said. We just now out on YouTube, just because we wanted to do something during this pandemic. We have what we like to call our season 1.5 quarantine. And that's just YouTube. Please tell me I'm adopted. There's currently 4 episodes up. We're going to do 2 more so that we can put ourselves up for Emmy consideration for next year, because they have a short form comedy category now. And all of that was done remotely. So I actually had to get on the phone with people and be the grip electric and producer and cinematographer at a distance, and then get all the footage here. And then my wife and as the director and me as the editor put it all together, and turned it around in under a week on each episode, which was a terrifying endeavor, but we did it. And it's been really cool how the two worlds, the music world, and, even editing, it's very funny. There's something primordial about rhythm. When you look at not just a music video, but a movie, or you look at how a trailer gets cut, and you start thinking, well, no, that cut point's not in the right spot. It needs to be there. It comes back to music. It comes back to time. It comes back to rhythm. It comes back to form. And it's the neatest thing to see that, even if it's being represented instead of musical notes in the air, it's being represented by visual and auditory moments. And I've been doing this now simultaneously with my work on the road as a technician, probably for about the last 5 years. Not a lot of time for sleep, but it's been very cool. And obviously it's a whole nother way to branch out in the arts and entertainment. It's exactly like the things that make me whole, which is the artistic side combined with, I love the tech side. I love tearing stuff apart, putting it back together. And obviously in the digital realm, when you're doing editing, understanding how a plugin works or how I can tweak this to get that. It's the digital equivalent of taking the screwdriver out, tearing it apart, seeing how it works, and putting it back together. And for me to be able to harness those two things together and actually even potentially put a paycheck in the bank from doing it for all these years is quite amazing and unexpected. One of the funniest things, and I challenge anyone who sees this part, go and find on YouTube or anywhere else you can. There is an old video that I saw when I was a kid. My buddy and I used to watch it relentlessly because we thought it was the coolest thing ever. Steve Smith and Journey did a video with these guys from NFL Films, and it's called Frontiers and Beyond. You have to really search for it, and the video quality these days is terrible. But what they did was the NFL Films crew followed Journey around and shot their footage, and in the end, they made the documentary primarily about the crew and the tour life and the band and everything. And one of the things in there was, they're talking to the techs. And I remember distinctly, we're sitting there with our big bottles of sugary sodas and our chips, and my buddy Pat and I, and we're watching this, leaning into the screen like, that's so cool, man. What kind of drums are those? And it was his drum tech at the time, Lauren Wheaton, who went on to be Neil Peart's tech with Rush. And actually, I had my celebrity moment when I knew I had made it when I actually was working on a gig with Lauren Wheaton all the years later. But he was talking to the camera crew and saying, oh, yeah, Steve's really great to work for. He really trusts me with the drum. He's tuning and changing some stuff. And I remember Pat and I looked at each other and said, "That dude's got the coolest job ever, man." Never once at the time thinking that I would end up doing that job for 30 plus years, 35. And that I can say it's easier for me to tell you where in the world I haven't been than where I have been. I've literally circumnavigated the globe at least 10 times, at least 4 or 5 in each direction. And, the amount of people I've met, the experiences I've had going to these countries and actually doing it all involved in music has been amazing.
Wow. I've got a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up. Just coming back to you studying with me, I know you studied with me for a little bit, and I don't know how you found out about me. I know at those times when I was teaching out of my parents' bedroom, which I converted into a studio, I was teaching a lot of people, and I actually had a little buzz going. I taught people from all over the Bay Area, and they would come, even if they'd be coming in from San Francisco from another country. Somehow they'd find out about me. I advertised in a little magazine called BAM, and then I think their word got out. But anyway, at that time, first, how did you find out about me? And then how did you benefit from the lessons that we had done at the time? And what areas do you think helped you the most?
I think, I actually think I found out about you from Steve Smith. I think he might have said, "You should go check this guy Rob out." I'd have to, if I'm remembering right, it may have been him, because I was saying, "Well, Steve, are you giving lessons?" And he goes, "No, I really don't have time for that, but you should check this guy out." And then I remember distinctly that you were like a kindred spirit to me in terms of the instrument, because you were already on your journey of like keeping things tight and tuning and looking at it as an organic piece of equipment. And I remember we did a lot of stuff where you were helping me get my head around like guys like Garibaldi and some linear things that I was having trouble feeling in a musical level. And I think one of the things that I remember the most that I got from working with you was to always be sure that your teacher is not just a mechanic. Here's some notes on a page, learn to play them. Here's a rudiment. No, that's not right because you didn't play it at the correct tempo. You were always about music. You always brought it back to feel. And your playing was inspiring when you would play at the lesson to say, like, this is kind of what I'm looking for, because technically you were spot on as always, but again, like a lot of the greats, there's that transcendence of technical capability, but it's not cold, it's not dry, it's not flat. It's got emotion that comes through the notes, no matter how many of them or how few of them there are. Because at the end of the day, one of my pet peeves is what I like to jokingly say, musical masturbation. I would far rather listen to a musician groove hard with a band and play no fills and nothing but 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. If it feels good and it makes my heart sing and it makes my foot tap, that's it. As opposed to the guy that says, how many notes can I fit in here just to put them in? There's a time and a place for that. And you always have the sensibility of, we want to learn how to make the notes feel good if we decide to put them in. And going through some of the linear stuff where obviously you're almost filling every hole so it can become mathematical and metronomic and therefore devoid of feel, as opposed to where it's going to have a a pump where it's supposed to, and accents where you want them. And you always had that really down, and you taught it really, really well.
Thank you. Totally appreciate your comments and compliments. And it was really an awesome time to teach all you guys. And I always tell the story that, when I was teaching at that time, it was mostly 20-year-olds. And I don't know, you might have been 20 at the time, but those were real valuable. Most people were broke. So, doing lessons, I would do stuff like pay me later. I was kind of one of those, don't cash this check because I'm broke, but hold on to it. Just wait. And, I didn't care. I love teaching you guys. And that was really invaluable for me. What I'm doing now is that's changed. I had to teach, younger kids, and, it's a different thing, because they, only a few of them really get it, but most of them don't. And it was a whole thing where I had to go real simple, and change my whole technique of teaching. But I always will value those days of I was teaching 7 days a week, 7 hours a day, and I do a gig after that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You were busy.
Yeah, it was always hour lessons. And like I said, teaching out of my parents' bedroom, and people had to come through, and my dad would be watching TV in the living room. They'd have to come through, and but it all worked out. It all worked out. It was just the greatest times in doing this project, reaching out to people has been amazing, because part of my journey is finding where people are, like yourself. Where are they? Yeah. How do I get in touch with him? You're not easy to get in touch with, It's like, well, here he is, but how do I get his contact info? I had to go through Facebook. I had to write some note, I know Chris, can you tell him to call me, or here's my number. And I had to do that a few times before I got through, but this has kind of been my journey. And then, through me not being, I'm not a person that gives up very easily. I don't really take no for an answer. I keep going until I get that person. And once I get them, we kind of have all this joy that comes up from what they've accomplished in their lives, and the whole process. So I think the last thing I want to ask you, just to help people that are just starting to get into music, and part of my courses are not only do you, getting into music is different now than it was when we were growing up, but getting into different parts of the business, doing different things, like you said, working at a store, doing clinics, doing teching, working on video and sound. What kind of advice could you give to young people or young musicians about getting into the business and not being discouraged because of what's been going on? Everything's very discouraging for people, and how they get in. The businesses have changed, record business and recording business and playing out and all these different things. So what advice could you give?
I think, okay, the best advice I could give anyone is don't look at this as a business anymore. There was a time maybe when you could say, hey, I'm going to make this my business. I'm going to go to MI in LA. I'm going to make it my business. The real focus has to be, the music is supposed to come from the heart. It's supposed to be fun. And if you're lucky enough to be able to pay a bill or two with it, in addition to anything else you do, you're way ahead of the game. And hopefully it's something that is fulfilling your soul by being able to play it. As a technician, when I sit behind an artist, and it's funny because all these years later, one of the very famous, he's passed away now, named Benny Collins, very famous tour manager, stage manager, road manager, who was with Journey in that video that I saw all those years ago. He said there's something special when you work all day and you slave away and you sweat and you bleed. And then when your band takes the stage and you can see that they're getting the audience, you get that high with them. You're there with the band. And it's true. So whether it be working as a grip or a boom op on a movie, and then you see the movie later and you realize I did that, or whether it be playing in the band and seeing those people in the front row, or record sales, or someone gives you an award, or whatever it is, it has to be more and more about that and less about the business. And towards that end, the way that you can possibly make that coexist with business is take the blinders off. I didn't have to learn about audio-visual equipment, cameras, lights, post-production software. I could have just stayed, I'm just a drum tech, man. I just set up the drums. I tear the drums down. There are drum techs that don't even know how to play a beat. I don't know how you would do that job. Personally, I think that's like doing it with one hand behind your back, but some guys that never learned how to play a beat, they just set it up and tear it down. They don't know what that guy does. Go find out. Learn what that guy does. You never know when it might help you. And so for me, suddenly realizing, oh, well, I can apply this set of knowledge over here, and then I'm learning about this, and I'm learning about that, and it all somehow circles back around to the drumming or to other musical interests, or I'm working on a song and I know how to make it sound good, even if I didn't play on it. I think taking the blinders off and looking at this life that we have as like this great experiential journey. Find the things you love to do. And my dad said it. He said, find what you like to do, make it your job, and you'll never work a day in your life. And in an odd way, more so than ever now, especially if you want to work in the arts. It's no guarantee. I'm not working until 2021 as a drum tech. But luckily, I have all these other things going on that can help me move forward and not just be sitting around going, I don't know what to do now because I set it up and I tear it down. And so I would just say to anyone involved is keep your eyes open. Don't be afraid to try other things. Do your practice, do your hard work. But you have to love it. I've never really played for the adoration of an audience intentionally. That wasn't what I got off on when I've been on stage, whether it was on stage in front of 18 or 20,000 people with Elton, or whether it was in front of two drunk bums at a bar in Oakland who had just peed themselves in the corner. I realized really early on it was my interaction with the rest of the musicians and that bubble that you get to create that brought me joy and peace and calm and happiness and art. And so the fact that 18,000 people dug what I did, or those two guys rolled over and looked up for a second, that's a bonus. And the same thing in some horrible way, the paycheck has to be a bonus. Wow, I got paid to do that? I love doing that. And it doesn't mean it's always easy, and it doesn't mean it's any easier now than it was then. It's just different, I think. But I think the diversification of being able to do a bunch of different things makes you very valuable. And I think that's the biggest lesson moving forward. The more you know, the more you're aware of, the more interconnected you are with all the moving parts, the more likely you are to be the choice.
Yeah, it's a good point. Kind of what happened to me is just having to do all these things and myself learning it and learning software and learning how to record out of accident because, I built a studio here and then I hired engineers and they taught me Pro Tools. I didn't go to a school. They taught it to me. I asked questions. My student built my studio, one of my students he was actually an engineer at a Green Day studio over in Oakland, Studio 880. So very quiet guy, but would just teach me stuff. And then another student of mine went to the Expressions. I'm about to interview him. He taught me stuff. And then I'd hire engineers. They teach me stuff. And then all of a sudden, I'm doing the stuff myself and I'm running sessions.
There you go.
All the video stuff, all these different things that even doing HTML, I never thought I'd be doing that.
Right.
So it's these things I kind of just fell into my lap, and just like you said, I thought when I was growing up that I'm going to be a drummer, and that's it. I'm just going to do this one thing. I never thought I'd compose music. I never thought I would, I never thought I would mix music and produce music and book bands, book myself, book musicians. All these things that happened, I think was, well, it's just like I have to do it. If I don't do it, it won't happen. And that's
right.
kind of really been the story of my life, is that if I don't do it myself, it's not going to happen. Just like kind of what you said with your project.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it is the business model going forward. You cannot compartmentalize, no matter how good you are, no matter what you bring to the table. Even, let's be honest, even if you're the greatest songwriter and singer ever, you need to figure out how to promote yourself, because there's so many people out there. Well, how do you do that? You can't just hire somebody. And if you do, can you really trust them? So the more you know, the more prepared you are, the more in control of your own destiny you are. Even if you get to a point where all I have to worry about is writing the song and singing the song, you're going to know what that guy's doing. You're going to know what that is over there. And you're going to know what that is and how it works. And you're not going to be a prima donna who can't figure out how to turn their ear monitor back on. You're going to be like, no, I know how to set it all up. It's all good. And you're going to ingratiate yourself to people by being that person. You're going to be self-reliant and worldly. And I think ultimately moving forward, especially with how volatile everything is, not just in the arts, but everywhere, the more that you can do that and cross boundaries, the better off you are. And music's a great thing for that, because not only does it bring joy, but it also, again, one of the reasons arts are so valuable for kids, even though they're so maligned at this point, is it forces you to think outside of the box while staying in the box. And, musical form is the most amazing thing if you really think about it. It's a language that's very rigid, and yet you can play within it and around it, behind it, in front of it. Speed it up, slow it down. And it gives you the idea of abstract thinking within the framework of rules. And to me, that's an invaluable lesson on how to handle any situation.
That's awesome. That's great advice, Chris. Thank you so much. And
my pleasure.
Thanks for spending the time with me.
No, absolutely, Rob.
Interview, and this has really been, a great. It's great finding people again, and then taking on this project and having people contribute to it. So I really appreciate you doing this today and all your input. And let's keep in touch now that I know who you are and I found you. And great. Thank you, Chris. Have a great rest of your day.
Now, fantastic. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.